York, this is Democracy Now!
Today is the day that we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. That's what this agenda is all about. Because climate change and our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life.
Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey introduced the new Green Deal to combat the climate crisis with a sweeping plan for a national mobilization to phase out fossil fuels. We'll speak with journalist Kate Arnoff. Then the Supreme Court strikes down a Louisiana law imposing strict regulations on abortion clinics just days after Trump attacked abortion legislation in New York and Virginia in his State of the Union address.
To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in a mother's womb.
We'll speak with Planned Parenthood's new president, Dr. Lena Wen. Then to the ongoing crisis of family separation at the border after officials at a congressional hearing Thursday did not dispute there may be thousands more missing kids who were separated from their parents than originally reported. We'll speak with the ACLU's legal errand. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a major victory for reproductive rights, the Supreme Court has temporarily blocked a restrictive Louisiana anti-choice law from going into effect. The case was seen as a litmus test for determining whether millions of women across the nation will have continued access to abortions. The divided court ruled 5-4 in favor of an emergency appeal by Louisiana-based abortion provider to block the law, which would have required doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of their clinics. Chief Justice John Roberts joined the court's 4 liberal justices in the 5-4 decision. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote the dissent. We'll have more on the ruling later in the broadcast. New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey have formally introduced the Green New Deal, a sweeping plan to transform the nation's economy and achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions in 10 years. On Thursday, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spoke outside the Capitol.
There is no justice and there is no combating climate change without addressing what has happened to indigenous communities. That means that there is no fixing our economy without addressing the racial wealth gap. That means that we are not going to transition to renewable energies without also transitioning frontline communities and coal communities into economic opportunity as well.
We'll have more on the Green New Deal after headlines. The New York Times is reporting U.S. intelligence agencies have uncovered a 2017 conversation in which Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told a top aide he would go after Jamal Khashoggi, quote, with a bullet if the exiled journalist could not be brought back to Saudi Arabia. 13 months later, in October of 2018, Khashoggi was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The discovery of the Crown Prince's statement was made as the National Security Agency and other U.S. spy agencies are reviewing years of intercepted Saudi voice and text communications. According to the Times, Mohammed bin Salman made the comment about Khashoggi in September of 2017, the same month when Khashoggi began writing columns in the Washington Post critical of the Saudi government. The White House faces a deadline today to determine whether the Saudi Crown Prince was personally responsible for Khashoggi's murder. The world's richest man, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, has publicly accused the owner of the National Enquirer of extortion and blackmail. Bezos recently hired a private investigator to determine how the tabloid newspaper obtained private text messages between him and his lover and whether the paper's actions were politically motivated. For years, the National Enquirer's top editor, David Pecker, has had a close relationship with President President Trump, who frequently attacks Bezos and the Washington Post, which Bezos owns. On Thursday night, a reporter at the Washington Post told MSNBC Bezos' security and legal team believe the private texts might have been accessed by a, quote, government entity. The National Enquirer's parent company, American Media, Inc., responded to Bezos' investigation by threatening to publish revealing photos of Bezos if he did not agree to publicly state that the National Enquirer's coverage is not politically motivated or influenced by political forces. In a blog post on the site Medium, Bezos suggests the leak of his text messages might be connected to his ownership of the Washington Post. Bezos wrote, quote, "It's unavoidable that certain powerful people who experience Washington Post news coverage will wrongly conclude I am their enemy. President Trump is one of those people, obvious by his many tweets. Also, the Post's essential and unrelenting coverage of the murder of its columnist Jamal Khashoggi is undoubtedly unpopular in certain circles." In his blog post, Bezos went on to write, "For reasons still to be better understood, the Saudi angle seems to hit a particularly sensitive nerve," unquote. Meanwhile, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Ronan Farrow of The New Yorker has also revealed he was threatened with blackmail over his reporting on the National Enquirer and President Trump. McClatchy is reporting Venezuelan authorities have uncovered 19 assault weapons, 118 ammunition cartridges, and 90 military-grade radio antennas on board a U.S.-owned plane that had flown from Miami into Valencia, Venezuela's third-largest city. The Boeing 767 is owned by a company called 21 Air, based in Greensboro, North Carolina. The plane has made nearly 40 round-trip flights between Miami and spots in Venezuela and Colombia since January 11th, the day after Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was sworn into a second term. Bolivarian National Guard General Endis Palencia Ortiz said, quote, "This material was destined for criminal groups and terrorist actions in the country, financed by the fascist extreme right and the government of the United States." Quote, "This comes as the United States is openly pushing for the toppling of Maduro's government." On Thursday, the new U.S. Special Envoy to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, ruled out any negotiations with President Maduro.
Maduro has proven he will manipulate any call for negotiations to his advantage, and he has often used so-called dialogues as a way to play for time. We urge all involved to deal solely with the legitimate Guaido government. The time for dialogue with Maduro has long passed.
Elliot Abrams is a right-wing hawk who was convicted in 1991 for lying to Congress during the Iran-Contra scandal, later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. Abrams also defended Guatemalan dictator General Efrain Rios Montt as he oversaw a campaign of mass murder and torture of indigenous people in Guatemala in the 1980s. The Senate Judiciary Committee has narrowly voted to approve William Barr's nomination to become Attorney General. Every Democrat on the committee voted against Barr, who previously served as George H.W. Bush's Attorney General. During that time, he was involved in the pardon of 6 Reagan officials, including Elliot Abrams, for the Iran-Contra scandal. He also oversaw the opening of the Guantanamo Bay military prison, which was initially used to indefinitely detain Haitian asylum seekers. Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota said, quote, "This is not the time to install an attorney general who's repeatedly espoused a view of unfettered executive power," she said. In related news, Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker is heading to Capitol Hill today to testify before the House Judiciary Committee, ending a standoff between the Justice Department and House Democrats. The hearing is expected to focus in part on Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe and whether President Trump attempted to interfere in the investigation. The Phoenix New-Times is reporting a prisoner in Arizona has died just 6 weeks after he filed a court document claiming he was, quote, being killed due to inadequate medical care. 64-year-old Richard Washington, who's African-American, died on January 31st from complications related to diabetes, hypertension, and hepatitis C. On December 15th, he filed a document accusing prison officials of, quote, actively refusing, unquote, to give him the medication he needed. His legal filing was titled, quote, Notice, I am being killed. In other prison news, dozens of protesters rallied outside the Federal Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York on Thursday. During last week's polar vortex, 1,600 prisoners were held at the prison without heat, hot meals, or electricity. The protest came one day after a judge visited the prison to inspect conditions at the jail.
Johnson. I'm out here in support of solidarity for the detainees that are at MDC. I'm also here to show that the oppressive behavior that the government is doing right now cannot be accepted, and that people on the ground are out here to hold them accountable. When we came to the courthouse on Tuesday, we understood that the government was going to do what they do. They're going to clean up house. They're going to show that the cells are perfectly fine. And then when all the smoke and mirrors are gone, it becomes back to the original plan of hurting black and brown people and not acknowledging them and thinking that they're lower than humanity.
School authorities in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, are facing criticism after a video was posted online showing a white school police officer attacking an African-American teenage girl. The video shows 4 school officials surrounding the girl as one officer punches her in the leg, then grabs her hair and violently pushes her head onto a cafeteria table. In the video, dozens of nearby students can be seen screaming at the officers to stop. Hazleton school officials said the officers were de-escalating a student brawl, which resulted in the suspension of 4 students. The video was posted online on Monday as schools across the country began to mark Black Lives Matter at School Week. In sports news, the Hall of Fame baseball player Frank Robinson has died at the age of 83. In 1975, Robinson became the first African-American manager in Major League history. And former Democratic Congressmember John Dingell of Michigan has died at the age of 92. A longtime champion of universal health care, Dingell served in the House for a record 59 years from 1955 until 2015. He is survived by his wife, Congressmember Debbie Dingell. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We go now to Washington, D.C., where the Supreme Court blocked a restrictive Louisiana anti-choice law from going into effect Thursday in a major victory for reproductive rights advocates. The case was seen as a litmus test for determining whether millions of women across the nation will continue to have access to abortion. The divided court ruled 5-4 in favor of an emergency appeal by a Louisiana-based abortion provider, Hope Medical Group for Women, to temporarily block a Republican-backed law that could have left the state with just a single doctor legally allowed to perform abortions. The law requires doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of their clinics. Pro-choice groups call such statutes trap laws or targeted regulation of abortion providers. In 2016, the Supreme Court struck down a nearly identical Texas law in a 5-3 ruling. The now-retired Justice Kennedy ruled with the majority in that decision. His replacement, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, voted with the minority on Thursday. Chief Justice John Roberts joined the court's liberals to block the anti-abortion law from taking effect for the moment. The news came just days after President Donald Trump attacked reproductive rights in the State of the Union address. Trump criticized the state of New York for passing a law codifying a woman's right to an abortion.
Be no greater contrast to the beautiful image of a mother holding her infant child than the chilling displays our nation saw in recent days. Lawmakers in New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb moments from birth. These are living, feeling, beautiful babies who will never get the chance to share their love and their dreams with the world. And then we had the case of the governor of Virginia, where he stated he would execute a baby after birth. To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in a mother's womb. Let us work together to build a culture that cherishes innocent life. And let us reaffirm a fundamental truth. All children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo responded on Twitter by writing, quote, "Breaking real Donald Trump just proposed rolling back Roe, the law of our nation for 46 years, affirmed and reaffirmed by numerous Supreme Courts. Never. New York has a message to those who spread lies and fear to control women's reproductive health. Not going to happen. Not now. Not ever." Well, for more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Dr. Leana Wen. She's the new president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund. She's the first physician to lead the organization in nearly 50 years and the first Asian American and immigrant ever to hold the office. Dr. Wen is a practicing emergency room doctor who's also served as the Commissioner of Health for the city of Baltimore. She entered medical school at the age of 18 after coming to the United States as a young immigrant from China just over 10 years earlier. In 2018, Time magazine named her one of the 50 most influential people in healthcare. She is co-author of When Doctors Don't Listen: How to Avoid Misdiagnoses and Unnecessary Tests. Dr. Leana Wen, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
It's great to have you with us. Let's start off with the Supreme Court decision. Actually, how significant is it?
It's significant to the women of Louisiana who have a temporary but important ruling that would allow them to continue to get access to health care, which is what it is. Abortion is a safe, legal medical procedure that 1 in 4 women will have in our lifetimes. We have to talk about abortion in the context of reproductive health care, and reproductive health care as health care, women's health care as health care. And it's important that the Supreme Court issue this temporary blocking. However, it's important to note that Justice Kavanaugh was among those who dissented, which means that all of us who were very concerned about his nomination are correct in that Roe versus Wade hangs in the balance with Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court.
Talk about Chief Justice John Roberts weighing in with the liberals. Again, this is a temporary decision.
Well, for us at Planned Parenthood, this is about people's ability to access fundamental health care. And we know that this is also the will of the people, that 73% of Americans support Roe versus Wade as the law of the land. And it's something that we saw in the last midterm elections, that women, particularly women of color, rose up to vote for a strongly pro-reproductive health majority in the House of Representatives. We also now have 25 governors and 19 state legislatures, including D.C., that will protect women's rights and reproductive health care. And it's time for everyone to respect that women's health care is just what it is, health care, and health care is a fundamental human right.
Were you surprised by Chief Justice Roberts weighing in with the liberal justices?
Well, this is a temporary blocking. We now need for the Supreme Court to overturn this rule that would cost women's lives.
Dr. Leana Wen, let's move to Title X. Now, most people in this country probably don't know what it is, but talk about why you're so focused on it and what is an imminent decision that's about to take place.
Well, first, I want to address what President Trump said during the State of the Union, which I watched from the balcony of the U.S. Capitol as a guest of Speaker Nancy Pelosi. I was angry and disgusted because the President of the United States deliberately lied to the American people as a way to manipulate, to spread misinformation, and to distract from his ultimate objective, which is to overturn Roe versus Wade and cut access to women's health care, reproductive health care, and restrict women's rights. We see what Trump is doing. And we see what Trump is doing also with Title X, which is the nation's only grant program that provides for cancer screenings, STI tests, HIV care, reproductive health care to millions of people. We expect any day now that the Trump administration will be issuing their final rules to basically gag doctors. Doctors like me will be prevented from providing our patients with accurate information. So if a woman goes to a clinic that receives public funding and she requests information, referral for an abortion, the doctor will not be able to provide her with a referral even if her life is in danger. It's ridiculous. It's unethical. It's illegal. And Planned Parenthood will be fighting President Trump and the Trump administration with everything we have because it is our goal. It is our job to protect women's health and the health and rights of all people.
Just to be clear, if a gag rule were imposed and you were asked as a doctor by a woman saying, I'd like to terminate my pregnancy, what should I do? What could you legally respond?
I want to first say that we don't have the final rule by the Trump administration yet. And so what we understand that the Trump administration is going to do is to prevent doctors from giving women their options. And specifically, if a woman says that she would like to have a referral to receive an abortion, a doctor who is working in a clinic that receives Title X funding would not even be able to give that referral, even if her life is in danger. And this compromises our fundamental ethics as doctors and nurses. It compromises the oath that I took when I became a doctor, which is to help all my patients to make the best decisions for themselves. It's my job as a doctor to trust my patients, to trust women. And politicians like Donald Trump have no role legislating and telling me what I can or cannot say to advise my patients. It compromises patient rights, it compromises physician ethics, and Planned Parenthood will not stand for that.
We're going to break, then come back to our discussion with the new president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, Dr. Leana Wen. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
Yeah, I came to body you fellas who want my body divided among the lot of you. Give us a lot of help us survive, and I know you rather you kill us than have us living our bodies. Believe in more mother goddess, I gotta ask, are we too radical for you? Or way too heretical for you snitch ass? Baby, take a sabbatical, you should sit back, cause I will never suppress what is under the stress. It's my decision if I will undergo vision, envision flesh as a prison, the warden is a physician. Insist on making decisions with expert skill and precision. Insist he's driven by kismet, but everyone know he isn't. I would rather go missing than not defend my position. You like my body so much, just take my bottom and kiss it. I don't need no pot to piss in, but can you do me a solid? I pay the rent here, so listen, no gentrifying my body, it's mine.
It's the animal line. It's mine. You're greedy. It's mine.
Yeah.
It's the animal line. It's mine. You're greedy. It's mine.
End of My Bloodline remix featuring More Mother by Screaming Females. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. I want to turn to Virginia, where a reckoning about racism and sexual assault has left the state government in disarray, with Virginia's top 3 elected officials, all Democrats, facing political crises that threaten to upend their careers in the state's leadership. The controversy that's enveloped Virginia since Governor Ralph Northam admitted last week to wearing blackface took a shocking turn Wednesday when Attorney General Mark Herring also admitted to wearing blackface at a college party at the University of Virginia. Just days prior, Herring, who's second in line for Virginia's governorship, had called for Governor Northam to resign. The first in line, Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, is also embroiled in scandal after a woman who's accused him of sexual assault came forward Wednesday with details of the encounter. So we're going to turn right now, continue our conversation with Dr. Lena Wen, the president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America, the first doctor to serve as the president in half a century. And the first Asian American and immigrant ever to hold that office. She also, before being head of Planned Parenthood, was commissioner of health for the city of Baltimore. Dr. Wen, Planned Parenthood was one of the first when Governor Northam admitted to wearing blackface, demanded that he resign, though Planned Parenthood had been a longtime supporter, financially and otherwise, of Governor Northam. Why did you take that stance?
Governor Northam is not just a governor. He's a doctor. There is profound racism in medical care that's led to huge health disparities for African Americans, for immigrants, for people of color. And I thought a lot about what it was like to be a medical school classmate of Governor Northam, who is a person of color, and what is the care that Governor Northam, Dr. Northam, and his classmates who wore blackface, what is the care that they delivered to their patients? We as Planned Parenthood will never stand for racism, bigotry, harassment, discrimination of any kind. And as a healthcare organization, it was particularly important for us to speak out because racism is something that deeply, profoundly affects the health outcomes of our patients.
Well, if all 3 of the Democratic politicians resign, and it's a little complicated, but Republican Speaker of the House of Delegates in Virginia, Kirk Cox, would be next in line to become governor. He's compared aborted fetuses to dead soldiers. This is Cox speaking against abortion just last week on the State House floor.
The eye can handle 500,000 messages simultaneously. We are no accident. How about a baby? Week 4, the 2 optic nerves are forming, and so is the lens. Week 8, that retina I just began to talk about is forming, those 130 million rod-shaped cells. Week 16, the eye picks up light. Week 26, the end of the second trimester, that eye is fully formed. It can see light, and the eyelids open. And I think if you shine a flashlight on a mother's stomach, you just might get a kick or a wiggle. With the miracle of modern medicine, at 22 weeks, we now have a 20% survival rate. What a blessing.
So that's Virginia Republican Speaker of the House of Delegates, Kirk Cox, who is in the chain of succession to be governor, considering what might happen. Dr. Lena Wen, can you respond to what he said and then also to what Governor Northam said about abortion?
Well, I think it's important for us to talk about medicine and science and facts. I don't even want to respond to these things that are said that are not medically accurate, but here are the facts, as I know them, as a doctor, as a scientist, as the president of Planned Parenthood. It's a fact that abortion is a safe, legal, medical procedure that is common, that 1 in 4 women in America will have in our lifetimes. It's a fact that about 99% of abortions occur before 21 weeks. It's a fact that those that occur later are because of extreme circumstances, such as extreme danger to a woman's health and life, and when there are things like unsurvivable fetal anomalies. I mean, I had a patient who found out in her second trimester that she was carrying twins that would be born without diaphragms or without ever developing their lungs. And so if she'd carry them to term, they would have suffocated upon birth. I mean, medicine is complex. It's extremely difficult for women to make very personal, very painful decisions. It's my job as the doctor to provide my patients with the information that they need to make the best decision they can for their health. And it shouldn't be up to any politician to make that decision for a woman. Actually, what these politicians are doing is trying to restrict women's access to health care. And as a doctor, I know what the cost is going to be. The cost is going to be women's lives. The American people have shown that we want more health care and not less. That's what we demand of our elected officials, to respect that women's health care should be treated no differently than any other aspect of health care. At a time when maternal mortality in the U.S. is soaring, is increasing versus all other industrialized countries, it's decreasing, we should really be looking hard at what it is that we're doing as this healthcare system. We have a healthcare system and a political system that does not value women's lives, that don't give us something as basic as bodily autonomy. 100 years ago, Planned Parenthood was founded on the simple idea that your body is your own. And if it's not, then you cannot truly be free or equal. It's that same fight that we're fighting now. I mean, we have a situation where, with this Supreme Court, within a year, 1 in 3 women of reproductive age, which is 25 million women, could be living in states where abortion is outlawed and banned. States across this country have passed abortion bans as early as 6 weeks when most women don't even know that we're pregnant. This is what's at stake right now. It's literally about women's lives.
Dr. Leana Wen, as you talk about health care being a human right, are you for Medicare for all?
I am for universal access to health care. There are multiple models that deserve examination and careful analysis and debate. Medicare for all is one of those proposals. It's important for us to hold up our values. And my value and our value in Planned Parenthood is that everyone must be guaranteed affordable, quality, compassionate, expert health care, regardless of who you are, what you look like, where you come from, whether you can pay. That healthcare must be a guaranteed right, not a privilege that's available only to some. And reproductive healthcare, women's healthcare, should be treated no differently than any other aspect of healthcare. I mean, think about the gag rule. How much outrage would there be if the Trump administration said to doctors, you can't tell your patients with diabetes anything about insulin? Well, that's what's happening. That reproductive healthcare has specifically been singled out, siloed, stigmatized, and attacked, when actually it's the same thing as any other aspect of healthcare. That's what I believe, that's what Planned Parenthood believes, and that's what we will always fight for, because our North Star, it's not, what we do isn't fighting about the what. What we do is fight for our patients. That's what we do every day, is to fight for our patients, their lives, their futures, and their rights.
Dr. Wen, before you go, your life story is quite remarkable, and I was wondering if you could share some of it with us. Talk about coming to this country.
When I was 7, my parents brought me here to the U.S. from China, and we were able to stay on political asylum. My parents and I, in those early days, really struggled. Even though my parents worked multiple jobs, we depended on Medicaid, we depended on WIC when my mother was pregnant with my sister, and we depended on food stamps. And I think a lot about what this president is trying to do to attack people like me. For us, Medicaid, food stamps, they were not an entitlement. They were our lifeline. They were what enabled us to stay in this country. And I truly believe now, as I am a new mom myself to a 1.5-year-old boy, I truly believe that I am living my parents' wildest dreams. And I'm so fortunate to have also been a patient of Planned Parenthood. So is my mother, so is my sister, just like 1 in 5 women in America. That Planned Parenthood and access to reproductive health care was also our lifeline.
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood and reproductive health care is what enabled me to be able to pursue my wildest dreams. And that's why I support and will always fight for this organization.
Dr. Wen, you went to college when you were 14 years old?
When I was 13. So I was in college when I was 14.
And when did you go to medical school?
When I was 18. And I was very fortunate and privileged to be able to do that. It's something that I always dreamt of being a doctor, but I didn't know that it was something that I could do. And being a doctor is the greatest privilege of my life because I'm able to take care of patients and their families in their time of greatest need. But it's also in medicine and in public health that I've seen how it is a public health crisis, this attack on women's health care and the attack on reproductive health care, the attack on LGBTQ people, the attack on immigrants. It's a public health crisis. And that's what I'm fighting with all of our supporters and our partners here at Planned Parenthood.
You were diagnosed with cervical cancer at the age of 27?
That's right. So I actually only told the story for the first time a few weeks ago. It's a deeply personal story, and I didn't share it. But when I was 27, I was diagnosed with early cervical cancer as part of a routine pap smear. And I was very lucky that the cancer was caught early. I underwent a procedure that I knew would affect my fertility. And my husband and I really wanted to have children. And it's something that we didn't talk about for years, our struggles with fertility and the cancer diagnosis. But I decided to tell it 2 weeks ago for the first time in an op-ed because I thought if I'm not sharing the story with the platform that I have, then how can I encourage others to? And how can I encourage others to get the HPV vaccine, to get early detection and treatment, which has saved my life? And I would encourage others to tell their stories too, because it's so important for us to emphasize diagnosis, screening, and to talk about how programs like Title X are so important because they are literally life-saving preventive services that we at Planned Parenthood offer to nearly 2.5 million patients every single year.
Dr. Leana Wen, I want to thank you so much for being with us, the new president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, first physician to head the organization in 50 years, first Asian American and immigrant ever to hold the office. She's also served as Commissioner of Health for the city of Baltimore, and we'll have you back on to talk about your fight against opioids and all the work you did there. In 2018, Time magazine named Dr. Wen one of the 50 most influential people in healthcare. When we come back, Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has just introduced the Green New Deal. We'll speak with journalist Kate Aronoff. Stay with us.
What's that floating in the water? Oh, Neptune's only daughter. I believe in Mr. Greaves, that poor man in the middle, one that talks like a little. I believe in Mr. Greaves. Do you have another opinion? Do you have another opinion? La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. Got fun, got frozen, got finally up, she finally goes in. I believe in Mr. Greaves. Do you have another opinion? Do you have another opinion?
Mr. Greaves by the Pixies. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. After months of anticipation, New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey introduced a resolution for the Green New Deal Thursday, presenting a sweeping plan to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions in 10 years and create economic prosperity for all. This is Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez introducing the resolution.
Today is the day that we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. That's what this agenda is all about. Because climate change and our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life, not just as a nation, but as a world.
The blueprint laid out by Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey aims to overhaul the U.S. economy with green initiatives that'll transition the U.S. to clean energy while guaranteeing all Americans clean air and water, food and housing security, and robust health care. In an interview with Politico Wednesday, House Speaker Pelosi seemed to mock the Green New Deal, saying, quote, "It will be one of several or maybe many suggestions that we receive. The Green Dream, or whatever they call it, nobody knows what it is, but they're for it, right?" she said. Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez addressed what some are calling a slight by Pelosi in an interview on MSNBC on Thursday with Chuck Todd.
What I introduced today was a resolution, not a bill. A resolution just has to pass the House, and the substance of our resolution is not a plan, it's the scope of the plan. Right. And so I think in terms of the scope of the plan, I think we're going to get there. We launched with over 60 co-sponsors in the House. That is pretty crazy. And so we were able to launch on day one with 60 co-sponsors. We have more rolling in. And I think we may even get a majority of the Democratic caucus on board.
That was Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about the Green New Deal. 2020 Democratic presidential hopefuls Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders, who is not announced yet, have all signed on as co-sponsors of the resolution. Well, for more, we're joined by Kate Aronoff, a fellow at the Type Media Center, a contributing writer at The Intercept and Jacobin. Her most recent article for The Intercept is headlined, "The Green New Deal Takes Its First Congressional Baby Step as Pelosi Mocks Green Dream," or whatever. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Kate. Talk about the significance of what happened yesterday.
So what happened yesterday was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey really sort of taking the first steps toward what it will mean to pass legislation for a Green New Deal. So as Representative Ocasio-Cortez said in that clip, this is not the plan to implement the Green New Deal. This is not going to become law. But what it does do is lay out sort of broad principles by which that plan can be implemented and sort of ramp up pressure on this Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, which Speaker Pelosi created several weeks ago and named members to yesterday, and sort of, puts the pressure on them and sort of on politics more generally, and particularly 2020 candidates to really come out and, endorse a very specific version of what a Green New Deal is and make it more than just a talking point.
So many people are wondering why Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who this has been the issue that she's really been pushing for, is not on this committee.
Well, so what came out yesterday, interestingly, after news that she had been snubbed, which turned out to be false. Nancy Pelosi had actually asked her to be on the committee, and she turned them down. And I'm not totally sure why. I mean, she did say yesterday that, she didn't need to do that on Chuck Todd. But my guess would be that she thinks she can do better elsewhere. She's on two very powerful committees with real power that have subpoena power, unlike the Committee on the Climate Crisis. And, she can get valuable work done there, and she can get work done in doing what she did yesterday, which is really standing with social movements, really standing with folks who are pushing for a Green New Deal outside and pushing that in the public conversation rather than in these hearings.
Now, I assume House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is bothered by this whole thing, because one of the first things that Congressmember-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did before she became Congressmember was protest outside of the House Speaker's office, specifically around this issue. But how significant is it that she was mocking it and saying this green dream or whatever this thing is that everyone's for?
Well, I think it's really significant because of just how much of an outlier it seems like. You have politicians who for so long, have fashioned themselves as sort of business-friendly, centrist, all of a sudden in the last year, because of the sort of rising popularity of really progressive ideas, because of Bernie Sanders, because of people like Ocasio-Cortez, coming out and supporting plans for something as ambitious as a Green New Deal. And so I think Pelosi really looks increasingly like an outsider, even when she talks about climate and even when she says, I am committed to this issue. Her solutions to it, or so-called solutions to it, are not just up to the task, and I think more people are seeing that.
So what is this Green New Deal? What is this committee?
So the committee and the Green New Deal are separate things. So Representative Ocasio-Cortez had asked for a Green New Deal select committee to arrive at a plan over the course of a year to, figure out how we would actually implement this thing, how to do an economy-wide transformation. And so in lieu of that, what this resolution does is lay out 14 projects and has several principles over which that process can be carried out, and to get people to start thinking about it. So it includes sort of decarbonization of electricity, robust investment in public transit, also things like preventing the abuse of eminent domain, ensuring free prior informed consent for Indigenous folks in seeing infrastructure built on Indigenous land. It's a really sort of sweeping, broad legislation that really puts the meat on the bones of the Green New Deal idea.
Let's turn to New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper about how to pay for the Green New Deal.
You're talking about zero carbon emissions, no use of fossil fuels within 12 years?
That is the goal. It's ambitious. And
how is that possible? Are you talking about everybody having to drive an electric car?
It's going to require a lot of rapid change that we don't even conceive as possible right now. What is the problem with trying to push our technological capacities to the furthest extent possible?
This would require, though, raising taxes.
There's an element where, people are going to have to start paying their fair share in taxes.
Do you have a specific on the tax rate?
You look at our tax rates back in the 60s, and when you have a progressive tax rate system, your tax rate, let's say from $0 to $75,000 may be 10% or 15%, et cetera. But once you get to the tippy tops, on your $10 millionth dollar, sometimes you see tax rates as high as 60 or 70%. That doesn't mean all $10 million are taxed at an extremely high rate, but it means that as you climb up this ladder, you should be contributing more.
So that's Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez on 60 Minutes, Kate Aronoff, talking about the payment of how you can fund the Green New Deal.
Right, and as she rightly points out and has several times since, we never ask this question when we've decided on national priorities. So whether that's the New Deal itself, whether that's World War II, when the nation decides that it wants to do something, we don't talk about, who will we have to tax in order to do this, who will have to pay up. We have the resources, we denominate our own currency, and, there's no reason why we should sort of hold this conversation hostage about dealing with the existential threat of climate change to these sort of parochial concerns about the deficit and these sort of abstract ideas. What's also worth bringing up is that, this conversation is never had in relief to the massive amount of costs that climate change will bring about if we don't do anything about it, which the National Climate Assessment Report has said, could be up into the trillions of dollars. The United States is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. And so I think that really has to be a part of the conversation, is not sort of how much will this cost us now, but how much will it cost us if we don't do anything about it.
Well, we're going to leave it there for now as an Arctic chill descends on the Midwest. I thank you so much, Kate Aronoff, fellow at the Type Media Center, contributing writer to Intercept and Jacobin. We'll link to her latest piece at The Intercept. The Green New Deal takes its first congressional baby step as Pelosi mocks Green Dream or whatever. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we end today's show with the ongoing crisis of family separation at the border, after officials at a congressional hearing Thursday did not dispute that there may be thousands more missing kids who were separated from their parents than originally reported. The hearing by the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations was meant to investigate the role of the Department of Health and Human Services in carrying out Trump's zero-tolerance policy that led to the separation of thousands of children from their parents at the U.S. border. It revealed a chaotic system without adequate measures taken to track family units, and that Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar may not have even known about the zero-tolerance policy before it went into effect. This is Republican Congressmember Brett Guthrie of Kentucky questioning Commander Jonathan White, formerly of the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement, during Thursday's hearing.
Would you have advised DOJ or DHS to implement the policy of zero tolerance if they had asked?
Neither I nor any career person in ORR would ever have supported such a policy proposal.
Democratic Congressmember Jen Schakowsky of Illinois also questioned Commander Jonathan White, again formerly of the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement.
Does anyone know how many are still separated from their parents? Nobody knows. And now we know that those in ORR custody, that there is no way to know how to divide out those children that have been separated. Is that right, Commander?
Ma'am, no, I want to be very clear. Children in ORR custody, children who have been in ORR custody, who were in ORR custody on the 26th of June, we have laboriously worked to identify those.
No, I understand, but
challenges those who exited ORR custody. Because HHS did not receive from DHS any list or any indication of the complete set of separated children.
Thank you.
In partnership with them, we worked hard to identify every one of those kids from those who were in care.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just feel like what's been happening is more than irresponsible and sloppy. But I really think that what we're talking about is state-sponsored child abuse, and I would go as far as to say kidnapping.
That is state-sponsored child abuse and kidnapping of children, said Democratic Congressmember Jan Schakowsky, questioning Commander Jonathan White. Well, for more, we're joined by Lee Gallant, Deputy Director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, lead lawyer on the ACLU's national challenge to the Trump administration's family separation practice. He was there yesterday. He testified before Congress. Welcome back to Democracy Now! Thanks for flying in early this morning.
Of course.
What are we talking about here? At this point, the Trump administration is admitting that there are thousands more children. They don't even know what happened to them, but were separated from their parents?
So, yeah, these are remarkable developments 1 year into the litigation, and we're still getting bombshells. An internal report by HHS said there may have been thousands more. They can't put a number on it because no one has tracked the kids. HHS at the hearing yesterday did not dispute that there may be thousands, but says it would take too long to try and find the children because they'd have to go through individual files. They had no tracking system. So they know the kids were given to sponsors. That could mean anything from foster care to a parent to a relative to a distant relative. We want to make sure that these kids are okay and that they can get back with their parent if that's what the family wants. HHS is saying that would take too long. We don't want to do it absent a court order. So we are going back to court in San Diego on February 21st to seek that court order.
How can thousands of children have been taken that no one has records of?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had an answer for you. That's the same stunning, thing that would happen earlier where they admitted that they said there were 2,700 kids. They couldn't track them. The judge said the government tracks property better than they track these kids. We thought it was over with these 2,700 kids, and now it may be that there's thousands more.
Now, of course, these kinds of hearings didn't take place before because Democrats weren't in power challenging the administration that was doing this, as Schakowsky said.
Right.
Kidnapping and abuse.
Right.
What did you testify yesterday?
I said that there are a few things that are critical for Congress to try and do now. One is to create funds for these families, because a lot of people think, well, if they're reunified, that's the end of the matter. But the truth is, in some ways, it's just starting. The trauma is so severe. There were medical professionals testifying with me who said that these kids may be traumatized for the rest of their life. We think Congress should allocate funds to provide medical care. We also need standards going forward. The other thing that HHS did not dispute yesterday at the hearing was that there are ongoing separations. And what they're constantly doing now, they know there's a court order, so they can't just do it willy-nilly. But what they're saying is, well, this parent's dangerous, this parent's... But they're asserting that unilaterally without any standards and without any ability for the parent to push back. We need Congress to set standards or the court to set standards. And lastly, we need these thousands of kids to be found.
Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar may not have even known about the zero-tolerance policy when it was instituted?
Right. I mean, that's what they testified. And so Commander White, who was testifying for HHS, said they were not... He was not given information about it in advance. He's not sure what other information was given, and the secretary refused to show up. And the chair of the committee also made clear...
Secretary Nielsen.
No, Secretary Azar for HHS.
Secretary Azar.
Right. And the other thing is the committee chair asked for documents in advance of the hearing to show who knew what. They didn't provide all the documents. I think the House is going to continue to seek those documents. But the other thing I would just say is, putting aside whether they got a memo from the Attorney General, HHS knew this was happening because there were hundreds and hundreds of young kids showing up that never would have shown up before. So whether or not they say they were formally told, they knew something was going on.
So, I mean, at this point, we're talking about thousands of children currently, potentially.
Right.
How do you find out where they are?
It's going to be painstaking, but I think lives of children are at stake. We have to do it. HHS is admitting now they have no tracking system, no integrated database, which is one of the things we're seeking in court and will be seeking in Congress for it to be created. But they're saying they could do it if they go through the individual files, but it's too many hours. We say you have to do it. I mean, these are children's lives. How can you just say it's not worth the effort?
So Commander Jonathan White said he would have never recommended family separation as a policy.
Right.
He talked about the trauma.
Right.
Another revelation was that there were no standards. There are no standards in the law for when separation should occur.
Right.
So what is the legislation that has to pass now?
You know, we have established in court now a standard that can be used. What Commander White was saying is, well, there's no legislation setting out standards. I think it might be worthwhile for Congress to make clear, so it's not just a court order, these are the standards we want you to follow. He was pointing out that Congress has never set standards, but it would be good if Congress set standards, but that's no excuse for what happened, because child welfare law in every state has a standard, and the standard is you leave a child with their parent unless the parent presents a danger to the child. That's not what the Trump administration was doing. They were taking children away in the hope that it would deter asylum seekers from coming to this country. So the fact that...
And you're suggesting they're still doing it?
Yes.
So...
We know they're still doing it.
Do you believe many children right now will never be reunited with their parents? And if someone is watching this, if a young person is watching this, what do they do to let someone know they're alone, or where do they go, or how do they find their parent?
Well, throughout this whole litigation the last year, I have never said I don't believe we will get the task done, and I'm going to stick to that. I am hopeful that we will reunite every child and parent who wants to be reunited. I think if there are relatives out there, foster care, they ought to let people know. But ultimately, it's too big a task for just that kind of self-help. We need the government to give us whatever information they have, and then we will start doing what we've been doing all year, which is calling these parents and children.
Do you believe Kirsten Gillibrand lied to Congress? Kirsten Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security.
I'm not going to characterize it, but I do not feel we've gotten the whole truth from the administration throughout the family separation policy, and I think there's bombshells still to come.
Lee Gallant, I want to thank you for being with us, Deputy Director of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, lead lawyer for the ACLU's national challenge to the Trump administration's family separation practice. Democracy Now! Has a job opening, full-time, one-year paid news production fellowship. Check out democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.